Best of r/malicious compliance episode 146. Subscribe for Reddit videos daily. Dog owner chains their dog up in the early hours of the morning where it barks at anything that moves. Neighbors frustrated by the barking and decide to bring their concerns to the owner's attention. Owner, it's a dog. Retired man has a solution. I found this on the Nextdoor app for my neighborhood. Someone had been chaining their dog up outside in the early hours of the morning and neighbors were becoming frustrated with its incessant barking. One user shared their father-in-law's solution to a similar dilemma and I found his compliance to be malicious enough to share with you guys. My father-in-law had neighbors that let their dog out early in the morning and he is retired so not always up at the time. They would chain it in the front yard for 1 hour or more and it would bark at every car that went by continuously. He talked to them about it and they got belligerent with him and started cussing at him and their response about the dog was it's a dog. The property frontage is about 100 feet so the houses were close. He solved the problem since talking didn't work by working on his boat motor at 7:05 within the city ordinance time. He cranked that up 3 days in a row for about 15 minutes each day. The dog miraculously stopped barking. Apologies for the grammar mistakes and misspellings. I did not write the comment. Thank you. Next. The I hate you note. Some years ago I found a tiny corner of a piece of notebook paper, and written on it in childish scrawl I hate you. I asked my oldest daughter, pretty sure it was her printing. She explained she'd been in the back seat, telling her little sister she hated her. She was told by my husband to stop saying that. Being very compliant, she stopped, and she wrote it to her sister instead. Having been a pretty mean-mouthed kid myself, it was all I could do to not let her see me smirk. Like many sisters they came to be each other's most trusted and loving ally as they grew older. I saved that little ripped off corner of a page for a long time but don't know where it is now. I hope I find it again. Thank you. Next. We should have drawn up the contract more carefully. In this my wife and I were victims of malicious compliance on the part of our twin daughters, who were in 1st or 2nd grade at the time. Like many kids they tended to hoard candy so a couple of weeks before Halloween we told them that they had to reduce their candy stash so that it would fit into a single pumpkin. It was taking up a whole collection of spookily themed receptacles. We kept reminding them but the candy stash never seemed to get any smaller. A couple of days before Halloween I was picking them up from their after-school art class when they walk out carrying an enormous paper mache pumpkin. It was probably 2 or 3 feet in diameter. Look dad they said cheerily we made a new candy pumpkin. Thank you. Next. Ex-father-in-law threatens me with court. Fine. We can go to court. Out a year back, my ex-father-in-law took me to court for an incident that had happened 5 years previously. While still married, I got into a door dinger with his Jeep. At the time I offered to buy a new door and help install it. He is a self-proclaimed mechanic and had the know-how. The project fell to the wayside. The door was never purchased and never brought up again. That is, until his doctor and I had a falling out and we divorced 5 years later. So I got served and taken to court for $2,000, a made-up number that he felt was adequate. During mediation, I offered him $1,500 and to never contact me again, at which he scoffed. So I told the mediator I'd like to go before the judge. I informed the judge of the original deal, and found a matching door from a scrapyard for $400. The judge took my side and granted my father-in-law $400. It was incredibly gratifying hearing him throw a fit in front of the judge to go ahead and file an appeal now and have the judge tell him that wasn't his job. And walking out of the courtroom as he angrily yelled at me that he would be seeing me again. Still haven't heard back. Thank you. Next. Want me to clean? Okay. My dad is a bit of a clean freak and insists I keep cleaning even after everything is put where it's supposed to be. On one particularly he said this, if something is mine, put it in my room. Not particularly bad, until you realize that he leaves half-finished drinks all over the house, as well as leaving his phone, watch, and earbuds lying around. So, for the next couple months, I would stack half-finished pop cans up on his dresser and bedside table, and put his phone and things slightly out of view, so it would take a couple minutes to find them. Nothing major, but just annoying enough. After a couple months, he let up and stopped being so strict. Thank you. Next. Email the signed form. It can't be digital. My insurance company requires me to sign a form to cancel my insurance to stop it from auto-renewing. So I digitally signed the form and send. They respond with, "We don't accept digital signatures. You'll need to print this out, sign and scan it, or at the very least, sign it and take a photo and email that signed photo." So I print out the previously rejected digitally signed form, take a photo of it and send the photo. My insurance company, "Great, thank you. This is fine. Thank you. Next." They asked him for a story. My dad and stepmom's church was kind of special. It had a very large, multicultural congregation. The majority of these people were doctors and nurses, and they came from Africa, Jamaica, Asia and various Pacific islands. My dad's poor overworked cardiologist. My dad has a bad heart, and his preferred mode of treatment for several decades was to stuff cotton in his ears and hum loudly when his cardiologist began speaking. This attitude had begun to catch up with him by now, and he paid for a solid chunk of his doctor's new house, and my daughter's pediatrician both went there. The church tried very hard to keep people involved. It was an interesting denomination, so instead of having a regular pastor they would rotate through a list, sharing the professional preacher with 3 other locations and asking the elders and deacons, one of whom was my father, to preach when it wasn't their turn. They had a vegetarian potluck. Veganism is highly encouraged in this type of church, which, given the different nationalities that attended, was often the most interesting meal I'd ever had. Some weeks it was very good. Some weeks you got to smile at the cooks while you fantasized about hot dogs. Of particular interest was the savory soup that looked for all the world like tapioca pudding with raisins. Raisins were not actually involved, and I never figured out what the bitter little brown things actually were, because it was hard to taste them through the copious amounts of salt. And the third way they encouraged involvement was the children's story. They had the children's offering. They would gather all the little kids up to the altar stairs. They would sing the children's song, and one of the many elders would come up front and tell a moral story common to their culture. The intent was to bring the various cultures together and instill a sense of community in the children. This was the intent. What usually happened was the person tapped for the job would go online, find a short fable from something like the Big Book of Virtues and read us a Christianized version of pagan myths that we all would pretend to be interested in. There was one old guy that was from India who never participated. I think he was the only Indian at the church his age, and he was very well respected by the congregation. They wanted him to participate and help foster the spirit of community in the church's next generation. The Indian old guy did not want to participate. He wanted to go to church, eat the extremely creative vegan meals at the potluck, and go home. But he was the only elder who had not participated in the children's story. He would clearly have some interesting cultural points to share, and all of his peers had shared the hot seat, so there was some good-natured pressure on him to participate. I was familiar with that pressure. It wasn't so much hard sell as it was patient. The kind of steady drip that wears holes in rocks after a few hundred years. The denomination, like I said, was unique, a little odd theologically and sometimes a little cult-like. Dad often wanted both me and my brother to go. I would attend occasionally because there were parts of the church I liked, but my brother resisted as long as he could. Finally, though, both my brother and the elder decided to capitulate on the same day. My brother went to my dad's church with a bribe of an all-you-could-eat buffet restaurant, and no, that was not a different name for the veggie potluck. We went to a Chinese place that served chicken. The Indian elder got the deacons to promise that if he tells the kids a story that day, they'll leave him alone afterwards. They agreed, secure in the knowledge that once this little old man got over his resistance, he would join the church in cultivating small minds and the way of God. Someone was so confident, they even mentioned it to the old man, which meant he had to step it up a bit. I kind of have this vision of him going through old family records and calling relatives back in India looking for the perfect story to tell the innocent little ears, and the rest of the church congregation, to make it clear that asking him to talk in public again was not a great idea. He made his choice and waited for his chance in the sun. I was feeling very unwell that day, girl complaint, so I ducked out of the beginning of the children's story. I'd already experienced the typical story told, and had learned pretty quick the kind of virtue fable the church liked were the ones you'd heard 5 or 6 times before you were in kindergarten. The little kid who gets lost and prays to make their way home. A little kid who loses a coin, prays and finds it. You see the formula. Story time was so predictable that it felt safe to skip the first 5 minutes. So when I came back and saw the expression of utter, existential horror on my brother's face, I was a little confused. And then I began listening to the story. According to my brother, the story began when a little boy in India found a baby cobra and brought it home. The boy's parents, being decent humans, told the boy that he could not keep the cobra. The boy defied his parents and kept the snake in a drawer, feeding it milk and bread and making it into a big strong venomous pet. The boy grew up too, and became a famous snake charmer due to the lovely relationship of trust between the boy and the cobra. Until one day, and this is roughly when I came back from the restroom, the grown boy was putting on a performance and was nearly done. He was tired. The snake was tired. But there were two beautiful young American girls. The elder was very specific about their nationality, who wanted a new show. They offered the snackajama boy an extra $100. So the boy took it and began to play the pipe for his exhausted pet snake. And you have to envision this gloriously beautiful sanctuary, backed by elaborate stained glass patterns and theologically significant carvings. Sunlight is streaming through the eastern gable windows. The church deacons are sitting on the altar steps. There are 20 or so children in front of them staring up with various stages of boredom, and this old man has his back to the audience, facing the children and the deacons, who started out smug but now have begun to sense the disturbance in the force. The old man looks right at the deacons, and says, "The snake began to wind around the boy. He wound around and around him, getting tighter and tighter, and then the snake killed him. The snake killed his friend. And that is the end of the story, children. And the moral of the story is to obey your parents." Mic drop. My father is sitting on the steps, his face a fairly alarming shade of purple. I look at my brother. He is watching this old man do the slow walk with explosions back to his seat with an expression commonly reserved for manifestations of Cthulhu. This is, remember, the first time he has ever been at this church. And as the children's director jumps for the mic with a bright tone and desperate eyes, my stepmother turns to my brother, notes that he has apparently just seen an elder god, and hastily gives him a reassuring pat. She says, "It's a cultural thing." And that was how the two of us almost got thrown out of the church for laughing. Later, I asked my father how he liked the children's story. He began laughing so hard he nearly drove into a ditch. The next time I went to church, the children's story was a pre-proved reading from the church school's curriculum. Old Indian guy never had to speak in public again.